The Spirit of Jazz podcast, where music dances with mystery, with your hosts, Bill Carter and Jeff Kellum.
This is Jeff Kellum with the Spirit of Jazz podcast, along with the Reverend Bill Carter.
Hey, everybody, it's good to have you back listening once again.
You know, Bill, we've been talking about your new CD, A Brand New Day, in recent episodes of the Spirit of Jazz. But, you know, we've never talked about the Jazz for the Earth project that you worked on when we were both inspired by visits to the Canadian Rockies. I did some video and some stills and so on, but you set it all to music. Let's talk a little bit about that project, which is now a decade old.
Hard to believe. And I think it holds up really, really well. I mean, the genesis was a trip to the Canadian Rockies for me in 2003. Went in the fall as things were starting to close down because of the early onset of winter. And there was one particular place where I think I had a sonic vision.
Wow.
I saw this scene and I heard this tune. And I thought, what is that? The scene is a lake called Peyto Lake, P-E-Y-T-O. It's on the Icefields Parkway, Banff National Park in Canada. I got a glance at this and thought, this is just not real. And to kind of imagine what that would sound like musically. It's typical for me. I got home, I sketched out a little bit of a melody. We tried it out on a couple of gigs, and it was okay. It didn't quite gel. And then I began to noodle with it. And 10 years later, in 2013, I was on a sabbatical, and we went back to the same place. I didn't have quite the same experience. There were hordes of tourists standing in the places where you could get the best photographs. But it inspired me to kind of develop this some more. And so what came out of it was a 6-movement suite called Beyond Banff. And I thought, you know, this could be the centerpiece of an album, and it could explore the relationship between people and their global home.
And that's so important, especially these days. You know, 10 years after that project, we're still looking at the beauty of the earth, and it's being threatened. The national parks are being threatened. It's just so important for us to celebrate the wonders of the creation that were captured, especially in the music of Beyond Banff.
So the first piece of the suite was actually a musical designation of my opening words from 2003, as we're going across the plains and the mountains are coming out of nowhere and shooting up. And I said, "Oh my Lord, look at that!"
Yeah.
And let me play the shape of that melody in a tune called Awestruck.
So that's just a section of a piece called Awestruck, because you were struck by the awe of seeing these mountains rise up as you drove along the highway.
That's right. And as the highway, which I believe is Canada Route 1, curves around at the base and begins to proceed through the mountains, I just couldn't take it in. And so I
Huh.
wanted a melody that kind of sculpted that and also pushed us beyond. And I began to kind of mine some of the basic material of that little, oh my Lord, look at that, those six notes. And so a lot of the material for the whole suite emerged from those six notes and other notes adjoining them. And it was enough of an organizational center that I came up with new melodies, new pieces. So it became a little more obvious in the second piece of the suite, up on Bow River, which is the river that goes through the Icefields Parkway. And I had these two chords, G and A flat. And so I put together a duet between the bass, Tony Marino, and the tenor sax, Mike Carbone. And that became an ostinato, a repeated line that went underneath the piece. And then as it develops, we have the other two horns. We have Jeff Stockham and Al Hom coming in. And then one more voice, our guest soloist on the project, the NEA jazz master David Liebman, who blew just this scary solo on a thing. It was outrageous.
Yeah, and I remember waiting with anticipation for Liebman to enter the studio, and then he comes in, and people didn't exactly kiss his ring or bow down or anything, but wow, Presbybop has welcomed a guest artist, Dave Liebman, and what creativity he used to interpret your tune. That was wonderful.
He did. It was astounding, and I think the other two saxophonists might have been just a little bit intimidated. Another piece that Liebman joined us for called Ice Cold, which is a reflection on the melting of the glaciers and the fierceness of them. Another piece called Wahoo, which is probably the most straight-ahead jazz tune, although it's a little quirky and out, almost like Thelonious Monk on drugs. And it was about how the tourists come and they essentially just take over and ruin the landscape, and not just with the trash, but shooting bears and whatever else they do.
Yeah. The beauty of the whole wonderland of the Rockies can be ruined by one encounter with a tourist who is just totally getting in the way.
It's kind of the conflict between Awestruck and consumption. People want to come in and consume nature rather than realize it calls the shots. I remember Belden Lane, the Presbyterian theologian, saying one time about holy spaces that nature in and of itself is, rather indifferent to the human creature. You're just one creature among many. And you can die out in the woods or in the mountains, and nature won't give one rip. So it demands some respect.
Right.
And then the last piece, which was probably the most challenging for the band, was one called "A View from the Summit," So when you get up on top of one of these mountains and see everything unfold before you, you realize how small we are. And the challenge that lies ahead of us to take care of the planet, which is our home.
In the Rockies, you're seeing from the mountaintops, you're looking down on, well, some snow-capped peaks in the distance, but you're looking down in these valleys filled with lakes and rivers and uh, the hills, the small villages that you can see every once in a while. But we took a helicopter ride, and man, I'll tell you, it's just the wideness of God's creation is just astounding. It does make you feel small, but very, very appreciative of our planet.
Well, let's listen a little bit to a view from the summit.
So that's a section of a view from the summit, which is one of the selections from the Banff suite from the Jazz for the Earth CD. And, as I think about that view from the summit, I'm thinking of how grand the Grand Canyon looks. Looking from the rim into the canyon, you're just overwhelmed by the expanse that you see, the beauty, the wonder. Well, when you're at the top of the mountains in the Canadian Rockies, you're amid these snow-capped peaks. You're seeing the lakes and the rivers below. You're just stunned by and overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, and the guys were overwhelmed by the music too.
Yeah. Well, and then as I was saying, as I hear the music now, as I replay the CD, I'm seeing the visual images that I remember from my wife and I going to the Canadian Rockies. But I can visualize these things, whether it's the icy cold creek and river, or whether it's the beauty of the mountaintops.
That's right. So that's the centerpiece of the Jazz for the Earth album, recorded at Red Rock Studios, our favorite place down in the Poconos, and recorded in a single day.
Mm. Mm.
We got together at 4 o'clock for a rehearsal in Clark Summit, packed up around 6, drove an hour down to meet Dave Liebman for dinner at 7, and then I think ran over to the Deerhead Inn nearby to listen to a little bit of music. I bunked for the night and then went over for like 10 o'clock in the morning. But I mean, one of the funniest things is it was frosty cold because
Oh yeah.
it was unbelievably cold. And Stockham left his French horn out in the car, in the trunk of the car. And so the next day he pulls it out at the studio and the thing is like frozen shut. So he had to borrow a hair dryer to warm it up.
That's an image I will never forget. He's sitting there on the floor, cross-legged, and using the hairdryer to kind of thaw the valves.
It was crazy.
Yep.
There are other pieces on the album too. There was a piece called "Winter Must Thaw," which was our opener, and then a piece that we played, I believe, on this show a couple times called "Shenandoah," which was a feature for Jeff on the French horn.
Yes.
One of the wildest pieces, though, was called Elegy. And shortly before the recording, I had been down in Baltimore to play for a church with Tony Marino. And we stopped at a shopping mall where there had just been a shooting in a shoe store, athletic shoe store, just the week before. And, we just kind of paused there and thought, this is just insane. And I thought, the world is not going to exist if we keep, committing acts of violence to one another. So I wrote this piece. It's reharmonized a couple times in the performance. It starts with Dave Liebman, and he plays it at a time with little accompaniment. But then when he comes in, the horns play with him, and the melody proceeds and then resolves. Because violence will not have the last word on us. I believe that.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a while to see that. So let's listen to a little bit of when the band comes in with Dave.
Okay. So that's just a sample of the tune called Elegy, written by Bill Carter. And in response to a shooting, in one of the many shootings that we endure day by day, when violence seems to take over the headlines. But it's a thoughtful piece, meditative. And on your website, Bill, I think there's a link to a performance of Elegy that you did at Binghamton University with Mike Carbone.
That's right. Tony Marino and Marco Marcinko on drums. And it's a powerful piece, but it's not the kind of thing you put in the concert for people to enjoy. It's one to get them to ponder. So, you sink it somewhere deeply into the set list. like the suite, these are more than just happy melodies. I think jazz should model human values at their best.
Yeah.
And not just let me show off with how many notes I can play, but let me create something that improves or deepens human life. And Elegy kind of comes from there.
So does the whole piece. The whole Jazz for the Earth CD speaks to the experiences of the human spirit in fellowship with or in communion with the planet we've been given.
Mm-hmm.
And we are moved as you listen to the music. It is challenging music. I know when Liebman played that kind of wild solo, um, it's not the kind of thing you're going to dance to, but
No.
it certainly is provocative.
Yeah. But there is a tune at the end that we can dance to. It's called Dance 24. And before the recording, we've been kicking it around for a little bit. And I wrote it on the 24th anniversary of my ordination to the Presbyterian pastoral ministry. So this year I would kind of title it Dance 40, although I'm not going to retitle it. Dance 24. And we knocked this down in the first take. The guys knew it. They understood what was going. And I think as a final act of desperation to get out of the studio, they nailed it the first time.
And when you listen to it, it becomes an earworm because you can't get the melody out of your head.
Well, I think it's only right if people have listened this far to the podcast, we got to give them that earworm and hand it off to them.
All right. All right. And, a little bit of self-promotion just to say that also on the Presbybop.com website, the video of the making of the CD is available.
Well, and we had this brilliant documentarian shooting all the video. Who was that?
Well, he was Jeffrey Stanton Kellum. He is part of my ego. Yep.
Award-winning filmologist, as we say, although I don't know which awards he's gotten yet. But we encourage everybody to check this out. Let's listen to Dance 24.
And with Dance 24, the concluding cut from a 10-year-old CD, which is still available, by the way, called Jazz for the Earth. It's the Beyond Banff Suite from Bill Carter and the Presbybop Quintet, along with guest artist, the NEA jazz master David Liebman. So with that, Bill, I'm looking forward to the next episode.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
We'll see you again next time on The Spirit of Jazz.
Thanks for listening to the Spirit of Jazz podcast. This is a production of Presbybop Music. To find out more about Presbybop, our music, concerts, and recordings, please explore our website at www.presbybop.com. And send us a note telling us what you think about the Spirit of Jazz. We'd love to hear from you. Check in with us again next time. I'm Jeff Kellum.
And I'm Bill Carter. Thanks for tuning in.